I still remember the smirk on his face when he called me. Unprofessional. The boardroom was silent, just the hum of the AC and the flick of his pen tapping against the table. He said it like it was a fact carved in stone, not a cheap insult thrown to humiliate me in front of people I'd trained, mentored, and built careers for. That day, I learned something priceless. Sometimes, revenge doesn't need rage. It just needs patience. I was the senior financial strategist at Linton & Ames, a boutique M&A firm with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. I'd helped close more deals in 2 years than half their senior team had in a decade. My reports were flawless. My presentations airtight. I didn't play politics. I didn't flatter anyone. I believed merit was enough. But in a company run by fragile egos, competence is the most dangerous trait you can have. The man who called me unprofessional was Marcus Hale, the managing partner. Charismatic, entitled, and dangerously insecure. He'd built his empire on charm and theatrics, not substance. And deep down, he hated that people trusted me more than they trusted him when it came to numbers. The day it happened, we were presenting the preliminary valuation of a $400 million logistics merger. It was my analysis that had gotten us that far, but Marcus wanted the spotlight. During the pitch, he changed figures on the fly to sweeten the narrative, ignoring risk factors I'd flagged. I corrected him, politely, on record, and with supporting data. That was my sin, not disobedience. Not arrogance, just truth. After the meeting, he called me into his office. The walls were glass, deliberately transparent, so everyone could see the drama unfold. He didn't yell. He smiled. He told me I lacked corporate tact, that I was technically sharp, but emotionally tone-deaf. Then came the word, unprofessional. He said it slowly, almost savoring it. The kind of word that doesn't just question your work, it stains your reputation. The HR head, Karen, was sitting beside him, avoiding eye contact. It was obvious this wasn't spontaneous. It was orchestrated. Marcus wanted control, and firing me for insubordination would have looked bad. So he went for character assassination instead. I walked out of that glass box with my heart pounding, my pride shredded, but not broken, because I knew something he didn't. Ego makes men like Marcus predictable, and predictable people destroy themselves. So I didn't fight him. I didn't send angry emails. I didn't appeal to HR. I just smiled, packed my things, and told him, I'll let the numbers speak for themselves. He smirked again, thinking it was a concession, but in reality, it was my first move, because I had quietly been working on something that Marcus never took seriously, a confidential audit report on internal discrepancies tied to one of our upcoming acquisitions. He'd told me to drop it because it was a distraction. But I didn't drop it. I'd found errors, deliberate ones. Someone had been inflating valuations to justify higher advisory fees, and Marcus's signature was on every document. So I waited, watched, listened. And while he paraded around calling me unprofessional, I let his own arrogance bury him deeper with every decision. They say silence is the most dangerous revenge. They're right, because by the time I finally spoke, the boardroom would never be the same again. The weeks after that meeting felt like walking through glass, quiet, sharp, and filled with invisible cuts. Word spread fast that I'd been put in my place. The same people who once asked for my advice now avoided eye contact in hallways. Coffee breaks stopped including me. My name vanished from project summaries. Marcus didn't fire me outright. He was too strategic for that. Instead, he demoted me subtly, stripping away my responsibilities under the pretense of restructuring. He handed my accounts to junior analysts who used to shadow me. It was humiliation disguised as corporate reorganization. Every morning I'd sit at my desk, pretending not to notice my reports being reviewed by people who didn't understand them. I'd smile when Karen from HR walked by with her fake sympathy. And I'd nod politely in meetings when Marcus made thinly veiled jokes about overzealous analysts. But what none of them noticed was that I had stopped reacting. I wasn't fighting the system anymore. I was studying it. In corporate wars, rage is noise. Observation is power. Behind that forced calm, I was quietly documenting everything, every altered figure, Every edited email trail, every lost file. I built my own archive, a silent fortress of truth. Meanwhile, Marcus was growing reckless. The board adored him for landing the logistics deal, which was now ballooning into a multi-million-dollar merger. He basked in the attention, taking private jet photos for LinkedIn and giving interviews about leadership resilience. He looked untouchable, but arrogance has a strange gravity. It pulls people too close to the edge without them realizing it. The more confident Marcus became, the more mistakes he made. He started approving transactions without legal review, rushing valuations, ignoring red flags and due diligence, all to keep the momentum of his public image. The finance team whispered about it, but no one dared to question him, except me. Silently, from the shadows. At night, I'd sit in my apartment, a dim lamp flickering over stacks of printouts and emails. My walls were covered in charts, names, transaction trails. I traced every inflated number back to its source, and each trail ended the same way, with Marcus's signature or his proxy's login ID. He thought calling me unprofessional had ended my career. But what it really did was give me freedom. No one was watching me anymore. No one expected me to rise again. I had become invisible, and invisibility is the perfect disguise for vengeance. One evening, as I reviewed an acquisition report, I noticed a strange pattern. The same vendor names appearing under different subsidiaries, all billing inflated consultancy fees. They didn't exist. I checked the corporate registry, nothing. Fake shell entities, all tied to the upcoming merger. It hit me then. This wasn't just arrogance, it was fraud, and Marcus was either orchestrating it or burying it. I remember sitting back in my chair, heart pounding, realizing the magnitude of what I was holding. If I exposed this now, it would look like revenge. No one would believe me. But if I waited, if I let his ego keep digging, it would destroy him without me lifting a single finger. So I waited. I kept working quietly, attending meetings, pretending not to notice the mocking smiles, but every smirk, every dismissive glance, became another log on the fire inside me. They thought I was broken, but I was building. And soon, that same word, unprofessional, would echo through the boardroom again. Only this time it wouldn't be directed at me. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. What started as a few suspicious vendor names grew into a web of shell companies siphoning millions from inflated deal valuations. Each one connected back to the same holding network. Anonymous, layered, almost impossible to trace. Almost. The person behind it knew the system too well. They used offshore entities, false invoices, and secondary sign-offs that looked legitimate at first glance. But I noticed a pattern in the timestamps. Most of these approvals happened late at night, minutes apart, using Marcus's access credentials. It didn't take a genius to realize what was happening. Marcus was funneling money through dummy consultancies and pocketing advisory bonuses behind the board's back. It wasn't just unethical. It was criminal. Still, I didn't move. Not yet. In the world of mergers, timing is everything. A single leak at the wrong moment can collapse a deal, and careers with it. I needed him to be so confident, so untouchable, that when he finally fell, there'd be no recovery. So, I played along. I began complimenting his strategic brilliance during meetings, even when his numbers made no sense. I laughed at his jokes, nodded at his ideas, and even offered to assist with some of the acquisition modeling again. He couldn't resist the flattery. He gave me small tasks. Busy work, or so he thought. Without realizing he was handing me more threads to pull, and I pulled carefully. Late one evening, I stayed back in the office under the pretense of reconciling data for our audit submission. Marcus's folder was open on the shared drive. I accessed it, legally, through my department's clearance, and found a hidden subdirectory labeled Vendor Liaison. Inside were hundreds of invoices from companies that didn't exist 2 months earlier. Every single one had been verified by his assistant, Chloe. That discovery changed everything. Chloe wasn't just a bystander. She was his shield. Her digital signature was on the approvals, but Marcus had full control over her workstation during off hours. Whether she knew it or not, he was using her credentials as a smokescreen. I sat there in the dim light of my monitor, Realizing I was now sitting on the kind of evidence that could end a career, a firm, maybe even a life, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of power. But power comes with risk. A few days later, Marcus called me into his office again. Same glass walls, same smug expression. He leaned back and said, "I hear you've been asking a lot of questions about vendor data." It wasn't casual. It was a warning. "I'm just verifying the audit trail," I replied evenly. "Standard procedure." His eyes narrowed. "Be careful not to overstep. You wouldn't want another incident, would you?" That word again. Incident. I smiled. Of course. Wouldn't dream of it. He thought he'd scared me back into silence, but what he didn't know was that I'd already encrypted the files and stored them off-site. If he touched me again, professionally or personally, it would all come out. Still, the pressure began to close in. People around me were starting to sense something was off. Chloe had become unusually quiet, avoiding me in the break room. Karen from HR started asking routine check-in questions, and IT sent a firm-wide email about unauthorized data access. Marcus was tightening the noose, trying to find the leak he didn't know he'd already created. Then came the final straw. He announced a company-wide celebration for the merger's signing, an event that would be live-streamed to investors. The deal, worth over $90 million, would cement his reputation as one of the sharpest minds in the industry. Watching him gloat on stage, I realized something. I didn't need to destroy him myself. I just needed to let him speak long enough for his own lies to catch up. The deal was riddled with falsified valuations, hidden vendor inflations, and fake audits. Once it passed to external regulators, it would implode on its own. And when it did, every digital fingerprint would point back to Marcus. All I had to do was make sure no one could bury the truth when that moment came. So that night, as fireworks lit up the skyline outside the company rooftop, I stood alone at the edge, drink in hand, watching him bask in his illusion of victory. He raised a glass to the crowd and shouted, "To professionalism!" The irony almost made me laugh, because in that moment, he had no idea his empire was already collapsing beneath him, brick by golden brick. It happened faster than I expected. 2 days after the merger celebration, I was called into HR without warning. Karen was waiting, face tight, voice rehearsed. Marcus sat beside her, playing his favorite role, the calm, disappointed leader. "There's been a concern about data integrity," he began. "It traced multiple unauthorized accesses to confidential audit folders. All signs point to your account." I knew the script. He was setting me up. Karen slid a printed report across the table. Timestamps, file logs, system trails. It was everything I had done, twisted to look malicious. They'd even planted a few recent logins that weren't mine, cleverly timed during weekends. "I didn't do this," I said quietly. "Check the source IPs. They're spoofed." Marcus leaned back, feigning sympathy. "I'd like to believe you, but perception matters more than intent. And this perception is damaging." There it was. The same tone, the same word he'd used months ago. Unprofessional. This time, wrapped in corporate poison. Karen folded her hands. "We're putting you on immediate suspension pending investigation." I looked at them both, calm but burning inside. I'd seen this trap forming for weeks, but I had hoped he'd underestimate me long enough to make one mistake before striking. Instead, he'd gone first, Marcus smirked. "Don't take it personally. It's just business." Those 4 words cut deeper than I expected. I walked out of that room feeling stripped of everything I had built. Reputation, credibility, dignity. Security escorted me to my desk to collect my belongings. My coworkers stared but said nothing. I could have screamed. I could have sent the evidence I had to the board right there and then, but I didn't. Because revenge isn't about noise, it's about precision. As I walked out of that building, a strange calm took over me. I'd lost the battle, but the war had only just begun. That night, I met with an old contact, a forensic auditor I'd worked with years ago during a due diligence case. We'd kept in touch. I told her everything, leaving out no detail. When I showed her the files, she went silent. Then she said, "You're sitting on corporate fraud. This isn't internal politics anymore. It's a criminal offense. Her words felt like a key turning in a lock. We agreed to work quietly. She would run an independent trace using my original archives, untouched by the company network. Within days, she found proof that someone had altered metadata on Marcus's system logs. The fake IPs, all routed through a proxy service built under one of the ghost vendors I had flagged earlier. He hadn't just tried to frame me. He had used the same fraudulent network he was using to embezzle funds. Lazy, arrogant, predictable. Meanwhile, back at the firm, whispers spread fast. HR kept my suspension quiet, calling it a personal leave, but rumors filled the gaps. Some thought I'd been fired for whistleblowing. Others believed Marcus's version, that I'd tampered with numbers to sabotage the merger. For the first time, I didn't care what they believed. Because soon, everyone would know the truth. A week later, I received an email from Karen. Final investigation pending. Meeting scheduled with compliance and legal next Monday. It was my opening. That weekend, my auditor contact finalized the full forensic report. Every fraudulent transaction, every hidden vendor, every falsified approval. She compiled it neatly, time-stamped, verified, and sealed. Together, we drafted an anonymous submission to the board's compliance division and the Financial Regulatory Authority. Then we waited. Monday morning came. I sat across from Marcus again. Same table, same fake sympathy in his eyes. But this time he looked a little too confident. Maybe he sensed something, or maybe he just couldn't imagine losing. The legal head walked in midway through the meeting, holding a file. He whispered something to Karen. Her face drained of color. Marcus frowned. "What's going on?" She hesitated. "Marcus, the board just received a formal notice from the FRA. They're freezing the merger until a fraud audit is complete." Silence. Then his pen dropped. In that moment, I didn't smile. Didn't gloat. I just watched the panic flicker behind his eyes. The same man who'd destroyed my name, now realizing his empire was built on falsified foundations. He turned to me, voice trembling. "What did you do?" I met his gaze. Nothing unprofessional. His jaw tightened, but he couldn't speak. For once, Marcus Hale, the master manipulator, had no script to hide behind. That day, my suspension was extended indefinitely. But it didn't matter. Because outside that glass box, a storm was already gathering, and this time, it wasn't under his control. I knew I couldn't win by shouting louder than them. I had to be surgical. A slow, invisible pressure that would let the cracks widen until the whole structure collapsed. So I built a plan that looked like chaos from the outside, but was choreography underneath. First, containment. My forensic contact and I secured multiple verified copies of the audit trail. Not just files, but cryptographic fingerprints, hash checks, notarized timestamps. If Marcus tried to claim tampering, the chain of custody would speak louder than his lies. We wrapped every document in layers so no one could plausibly dismiss the evidence as a vendetta. Second, alliances. I reached out to people who had reason to want the truth, but not to be seen with me. A quiet compliance director at a rival firm, an ex-board member who had quietly complained about Marcus's shortcuts, and a seasoned investigative journalist who loved corporate exposés. I fed them small, verifiable pieces, nothing that exposed the whole map, but enough to make them listen. People like to act when their reputations or money are at risk. I made it impossible for the right ears to ignore the risk. Third, the human element. Chloe was the weakest link in his armor. She was young, terrified, and cleverly used as a prop in his scheme. Sending her into the storm without protection would have been cruel and stupid. I arranged for legal counsel to approach her under anonymity, giving her the space to tell what she knew without immediate retaliation. Her testimony wouldn't stand alone, but paired with the forensic trail, it would become a human confirmation of the paper trail. Fourth, the bait. Marcus loved the stage. He loved interviews, LinkedIn posts, and glossy photos that made donors feel safe. I used that. Through the journalist and a few well-placed investor contacts, I created the expectation of a celebratory piece about the merger's genius. Marcus took the bait. He went public, he talked numbers, he defended decisions, and most importantly, He added new justifications into the public record. Every public claim he made that contradicted the sealed audit copies became a fresh thread to pull. Fifth, redundancy. I didn't rely on a single outlet or a single regulator. The anonymous dossier went to the Financial Regulatory Authority, to 2 major institutional investors with seats on the advisory panel, and to the journalist with the strongest track record for follow-up. If one path was blocked, another would force the reaction. This wasn't revenge by chance. It was pressure from 3 directions at once. Finally, patience. I let Marcus grow bolder, knowing his next move would be hurried and sloppy. He started authorizing last-minute journal entries and emergency payments to consultants. He asked Chloe to sign off on audits at odd hours. Every rushed act left a fingerprint. The night before the regulators called for a preliminary hearing, I sat on my apartment floor with a single lamp and watched the city breathe. I thought about how he'd once called me unprofessional as if it were the final truth. Now that word had flipped. It sat on him like a mask he couldn't remove. I had set the pieces. All that remained was to let him move. His next mistake would be the one that pulled the entire tapestry loose. And when it did, there would be no patching it back together. Tomorrow, the board would open sealed envelopes. And then everything I'd been building in silence would demand to be seen. The morning of the hearing felt like a storm held behind glass. The office building buzzed with whispers, corridors unusually quiet, eyes darting toward closed doors. Everyone knew something was wrong. No one knew how bad. I watched from the lobby cafe across the street. I wasn't invited, of course. Officially, I was under investigation. Unofficially, I was the ghost haunting the walls of Linton and Ames. The hearing was set for 9 a.m. sharp. By 9:10, I could already tell from the faces pressed against the tinted windows that the earthquake had begun. Inside that boardroom, the Financial Regulatory Authority's audit team sat across from Marcus and the firm's legal counsel. They weren't here for questions. They were here for proof. I knew exactly what they'd start with: the offshore vendor trail. Each document bore his signature, each approval linked directly to his credentials. He'd probably try to deflect, to blame a technical breach, maybe even me. But that was the beauty of the trap. Every fabricated trail he created to frame me had looped back into his own fraud. At 9:34, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my forensic contact. He's panicking. I smiled into my coffee. Reports say Marcus had gone pale midway through the presentation. When they pulled up the metadata for one of the inflated invoices, the same one he'd used my name to approve, the timestamp showed something he couldn't explain. His system logged in from the same minute his personal access card recorded him. Leaving the building, he'd automated his fraud using his assistant's workstation but forgot about physical access logs. The one record, no. Hacker can fake. Within minutes, compliance turned from polite curiosity to open confrontation. His voice, once smooth and commanding, grew shaky. He tried to push blame, to suggest departmental oversight. He even dragged Chloe's name into it. But when she was called in to testify, the entire room shifted. Trembling but resolute, she told the truth. About the late-night calls, the forced signatures, the blind approvals. She presented her phone, filled with voice notes and texts Marcus had sent, demanding she clean the numbers before the merger filing. Her fear melted into quiet fury. That was the final blow. The board, blindsided and furious, adjourned the meeting. Regulatory agents sealed access to his office drives. His keycard was deactivated before the day ended. By the time Marcus realized what was happening, the firm he'd built his ego on was already treating him like a liability. I watched him step out of the building later that evening. No entourage, no cameras, just a man whose empire had turned to dust in his hands. He looked smaller somehow, deflated, a shadow of the arrogance he once wore like armor. He spotted me across the street. For a second, our eyes met, just long enough for him to understand. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The silence between us said everything. Over the next few days, the news spread like wildfire. Regulatory audit halts 90 million merger, read one headline. Senior partner under investigation for financial misconduct, read another. His face, once plastered on business magazines, now floated under headlines filled with words like fraud, forgery, and internal probe. Every interview he'd given, every boast, every arrogant speech, now replayed as irony. Investors pulled out, clients demanded transparency, and the board, desperate to save face, initiated an internal overhaul that swept away anyone tied to his network. I wasn't reinstated immediately. I didn't expect to be. That wasn't the goal. I hadn't fought to get my old title back. I'd fought to let truth breathe. A week later, I received a short, unsigned note delivered to my apartment. He resigned. The deal's dead. The board knows everything. I think they owe you an apology. K. I folded it quietly and placed it beside my laptop. No celebration. No victory dance, just quiet closure. The same people who once called me unprofessional were now rewriting policy manuals based on my case. My silence had done what confrontation never could. It had let their own vanity destroy them from within. And somewhere inside, I realized that was the truest revenge of all. When the boardroom's silence finally broke, it wasn't with anger. It was with applause. The chairman, who had barely spoken in months, looked straight at Ethan and said, "We do not reward arrogance. Miss Warren, you've done this firm a service." In that single sentence, the months of humiliation, the quiet restraint, the nights spent biting my tongue, all of it felt worth it. Ethan was escorted out within the week, his personal assistant wiping tears as security collected his access card. He didn't say a word to me, but I caught the look in his eyes, confusion mixed with disbelief. How could the girl he'd called unprofessional dismantle him so cleanly? The board reinstated me immediately, this time not as an analyst, but as a partner in training. The irony was delicious. I got Ethan's corner office, his assistant, and the view he used to brag about. And when the chairman mentioned the internal restructuring, he added one quiet note. "We need more people who carry themselves with your professionalism." I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply placed my hand on the glass window, watching the city stretch beneath me. The skyline that once looked unreachable now felt like something I had earned piece by piece, through restraint and precision. A week later, I found an unsigned card on my desk. It read, "I underestimated you, no name." But I knew the handwriting. I closed the card and slipped it into my drawer. Revenge wasn't about making him suffer. It was about reclaiming my dignity in the same arena where he tried to destroy it. And I had done that with elegance, not ego. As I turned back to my computer, I whispered under my breath, "Unprofessional, huh?" and smiled faintly. Because in the end, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fight dirty. I simply let their ego do the work for me. And that's the thing about power. It's never taken. It's revealed. This is Revenge Untold, where every downfall starts with an overconfident whisper.